Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on how about a career in forensic accounting and fraud examining. My name is Mohammad Ibrahim. I'm the host for today's program. I welcome you all to this program. Let me introduce the two panelists for today's webinar. The first being the subject matter expert, who is a fraudologist, a certified fraud examiner, and many more accolades, credentials, and qualifications attached to his name. So we welcome Iyad Murtada, the subject matter expert, to this program. Iyad, please, we are happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Iyad. The second panelist needs no introduction. He is a well-known person among the professional accounting fraternity in India. He is a partner at Yoganandan Ram. He is a seasoned trainer for professional students. He is an author and a public speaker. We welcome V. Pattabhiram to this program.
Thank you, Mohammed. Good evening, Iyad. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We will get started with our first webinar, which is on forensic accounting and fraud examination. I'm not like the modern day anchor who believes that the anchor should speak 56 out of the 60 minutes. I honestly believe that our subject matter expert for the day, our guest, is Iyad Murtada. He is the bridegroom for the day. We'll give him as much time as is possible. Iyad, after a very brief preliminary, I will ask you my first question. I grew up believing that the word forensic had to do with the police. Over the years, I also learned that a cardiologist, a radiologist, a diabetologist, all of these are from the world of medicine. Now, Mohammed introduced you as a fraudologist. I want to know from you, what is this? What is this forensic, which is in the world of police, got to do with audit? And what is this fraudologist, again, got to do with the world of audit? I would like you to tell us the distinction and maybe give us an example to understand.
All right, so for us to understand, very important to go over the definition. The definition of forensic, it can be medical forensic, digital forensic, any kind of a criminal forensic. You are using science to be able to provide evidence and proof in the court. So if you are accounting forensic, what you are doing, you are actually going over certain issues for you to be able to find financial evidence, to be able to go find financial documents, financial statements for you to support your expert opinion in court. So the court will ask you to go do an investigation or do an audit or do an accounting and be able to bring actual evidence that can prove that actually this what happened or this what didn't happen. This is when we are speaking about forensic. The same thing will apply to anything. If you are handling a crime and there's a crime happen and the police will come, they will use forensic for them to be able to collect the DNA, to collect all the evidence that they will use forensic examination on it to prove that actually how the crime happened. The same thing when we are speaking about medical issue and someone is doing forensic examination for them to know exactly how this person died or what was the symptoms. It's always about using science. This is the main concept of using science.
All right.
Now, when we are speaking about a fraud examination is actually not a science. Forensic is a science, but fraud examination is not a science. Fraud examination is all about using the fraud examination technique. These techniques are created by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. For us to be able to use these practical techniques during our investigation work, for us to be able to uncover fraud, for us to be able to collect the evidence, for us to be able later to write our report, and then to be able to help the organization in figuring out what the internal controls that they need to fix in the future so fraud will not happen. Now, you ask a very important question. You say, yeah, what is this why you are fraudologist? What is this term? So this term, which is called fraudology. So we know what's fraud. Fraudology, it's actually the art of fraud and the science of uncovering it. It's a term that have been created by me. It doesn't exist anymore before. So like we said before, we spoke about fraud examination as a technique. I have came up with this term to explain that fraud is different than any other discipline in the world. Fraud is related to two issues. This is why we created the fraudology, which is the art of fraud, how fraudsters, they do fraud, because fraudsters, they use art. And then how can we, as a fraud examiner, use science to be able to uncover it?
All right. Yad, I think you will have to remove the PPT. People want to see you in full. So if you can remove that viewing of your screen,
Sure.
even that introduction part, if you can remove at this particular point in time. We are now talking about the first of our 6 parts. The part that we are now talking about is an introduction to forensic accounting and fraud examination. I'm now going to move on to my second question to Iyad. I want to ask Iyad as to what is this fundamental difference between statutory audit, which is what is the bread and butter of most chartered accountants in practice, vis-a-vis forensic accounting and vis-a-vis fraud examination. What is the fundamental difference amongst these three?
All right, so we need to understand something very important when we are conducting audit. When we are conducting audits, we are wearing the hat of an auditor. So as an auditor, your job when you are conducting audit, there are two things. Number one, preventing fraud. What's the meaning preventing fraud? You need to audit the internal controls inside the organization related to operation, related to financial reporting, related to compliance, to ensure that they are actually working effectively so there's no fraud happening. This is your first responsibility. The second responsibility is you need to catch fraud. Someone say, wait, Iyad. As auditors, we need to catch fraud? Yes, you need to catch fraud. How you are going to catch fraud? By actually looking for red flags and recommending investigation. The meaning, you are going to use analytical procedures. What's the meaning of analytical procedures? Comparing financial and non-financial information to look for any clues related to fraud. And once you find clues related to fraud, you are not allowed to investigate it. Remember, you are wearing the hat of an auditor. You need to actually contact the actual audit, investigation team and handle the case to them, and they will do the investigation. So you are not allowed to request documents. You are not allowed to interview individuals. You are not allowed to actually go and do any kind of forensic examination or do any kind of investigation work. You need to actually contact the investigators. Now, once we have clues related to a fraud case, usually fraud examiners will come. And fraud examiners, they are wearing the hat of investigator. They are wearing the hat of an examiner. So their job is to actually go and look for evidence, interview individuals, figure out exactly how this fraud happened. So their responsibility to uncover fraud and then provide conclusion at the end of this report. If this is potential fraud or not potential fraud. Even fraud examiners, they are not allowed to say this is a fraud. What? Yes. As a fraud examiner, we only can say that the person violated the policy of the organization. We can't say fraud. We only can say that he said statement that's not true. We can't say he's lying. We only provide this evidence for the court for them to know that actually based on our evidence, the guy actually violated the policy and the procedures. And this violation is in return is causing a potential fraud that we need to take a case against him. Now, what will happen? When we go to court, the court will go and bring someone who is actually forensic accountant or forensic auditor, and he will go look at the evidence and provide expert opinion. Based on his opinion, if based on this evidence that he got, that actually this is, yes, most likely potential fraud or no, and after that, the court will decide. So we need to differentiate between the person who's doing forensic accounting or forensic auditing, which is they are using the actual financial information as an evidence in court, and between fraud examiner that their job is to uncover fraud.
All right. Correct me if I am wrong. This issue about forensic accounting and fraud examination has received maximum press after those spectacular accounting scandals that took place in Tyco, in WorldCom, in Enron. Is that correct? Or forensic accounting and fraud examination, it actually dates back to the 70s?
No, forensic examination, and actually it's dating back to the 70s. If you see exactly the Association of Certified Fraud Examiner established around 31 years ago. So they've been for a long time existing. But actually, in the last 20 years, what happened? We start actually creating more formalization, more standardization. We start understanding exactly what is the proper way for us to do it. Because what will happen in the old days? In the old days, someone will go and do fraud, and then we go to do an examination on him, and when he will go to the court, he will be able to run away from it, because we don't have actually disciplines to explain exactly what is the proper way of obtaining the evidence. We don't have a discipline to explain what is the proper way of maintaining the evidence. We don't know exactly how we need to take this evidence and make it admissible to the court. How can we actually, how the court can rely on it? So over the last approximately 20 years, we have created more disciplines related to forensic accounting, related to fraud examination, related to the legal elements of fraud. Even the regulations that we had before 20 years ago, they don't exist at that time, related to the protection of the whistleblower, related to how can we actually take a criminal and civil action against fraudsters. And once now we have everything in place today, it's harder for individuals to run away after they do fraud, but unfortunately, fraud is still booming.
All right, we will now go to our second segment, the segment that we call scope of work. Maybe for 10 seconds, you can put that up on the screen. We are done with introduction, where Iyad Murtada has told us that forensic accounting and fraud examination might have become more popular in the last 20 years, but it is something that has been there right from the 70s. We're now going to look at our second segment, where we talk about scope of work. And before we do that, I think Mohammed Ibrahim wants to make an announcement.
Yeah. Participants, we would like to let you know that forensic accounting is one of the career which is being highlighted in our book, Beyond 2020-25 Happening Careers in India. So there are more webinars lined up, like brand management, enterprise risk management, private equity, which are part of the book, all these careers are part of the book. And stay tuned and stay connected with us to know more about these careers, which are exciting, which have been brought up after a lot of research. So
All
with
right.
this, yeah, I hand over the control to Pattabhi.
Okay. What are the typical work areas in which frauds take place? Just to give you a perspective of what I have in mind, olden days when I was in my internship at Deloitte, we used to talk about payroll. So payroll was possibly one of the fraud areas once upon a time. Is that still the one, or are there specific areas where fraud take place, or you think frauds can happen across the company spectrum?
All right, so when we are speaking about fraud, we need to understand the three categories of fraud. Always fraud, we categorize it in three ways. Number one, it can be corruption. So in that way, someone is actually doing corruption by doing one of four things. It can be conflict of interest, or he's receiving bribe, or actually it can be an economic extortion. He's actually forcing someone to do something even against their will. For example, he's making someone pay money, even that they don't have to pay money to do business with the company. Or it can be actually illegal gratuity. You are taking tip from the client to do business as a government official. Now, these are the four categories when we speak about corruption. Now, again, we say fraud is three categories. Number one, corruption. Number two is asset misappropriation. So when we speak about asset misappropriation, the meaning someone is taking the cash or the inventory from the organization. And they can take it in three ways. They can take the cash and inventory coming in. We call it skimming. He is actually taking the cash and inventory before being recorded inside the organization. Or it can be larceny, which is someone stealing the cash and inventory inside the organization. So he will go to the safe, will go to the warehouse, and he will steal them. Or it can be fraudulent disbursement, which is the money going outside the organization. And it can be going outside the organization through billing, or it can be through payroll, like what we say. or it can be happening through check or electronic payment, or it can be happening through expense reimbursement or different other schemes. But today we can see in the money going outside the organization, the most common scheme is billing, is not payroll anymore, because organizations, they have so many bills that they have to pay, and this is why the money is going outside. So this is the second category, asset misappropriation. The third category is financial statement fraud, where someone manipulating the financial reporting and disclosure inside the organization. So this is why every time you are handling a fraud case, you need to understand in which category we are looking at, because every category we have different kind of investigation we need to conduct.
Thank you very much, Yad, on that explanation. Just one request to the attendees. Any questions that you have, please put it in the Q&A box. Please do not put it in the chat box. The Q&A box is something that Mohammed will be looking at constantly so that he can pick the question for the final 15 minutes of a Q&A session that we would have. Back to scope of work. Yad, would you like to name 3 industries which have the maximum scope for fraud?
Okay, so when we are speaking about industry, it's different industry, they have different kind of fraud. But when we are speaking about the kind of fraud that can happen, we can see that actually, usually fraud is happening mostly in government entities, in banking, and in manufacturing. And someone would say, and why it's happening in these categories? Because this is where is the money in. So someone can do any kind of these fraud schemes in this industry. And this is where we need to be able to identify, what kind of schemes that this person will do. So like we said, it can be corruption, asset misappropriation, or financial statement fraud. If you look at the banks, you can see in the banks what kind of fraud is happening. Most likely it's corruption. Someone is taking advantage of the banks by actually going and taking bribes from customers to give loans. Or when we are speaking about manufacturing, what kind of fraud can happen in manufacturing? It can be happening asset misappropriation. Someone is actually stealing the cash or inventory coming in or out. And we can see in government fraud is happening in so many ways. But in government, the fraud is unique. Why? Because in government, it's mixed between corruption, between asset misappropriation. Not so much financial statement fraud, because they don't have to provide financial statement reporting, but more like in the internal reporting process. So these are the 3 main industries that we can see these schemes happening in.
What about the insurance sector? People perpetrating frauds by making fraudulent claims. Is that also an area which is significant, or is it very small?
That area is really big. Like, in UAE here, we reported last year more than 1 billion fraud, 1 billion dirham fraud in healthcare insurance.
Okay.
So
okay.
we can see the main issue when we speak about insurance, that insurance companies are attacked from different directions. The meaning, inside the insurance company, there are individuals who are doing fraud by issuing fraudulent policy related to insurance. Outside the organization, the customers, they are sending fake claims, especially now under Corona, under the situation. So many individuals, they are sending all these fake claims. And insurance companies today, you can't imagine what is going on with them. They are going crazy because everyone is trying to submit claims for this and for that, and they are trying to figure out exactly what they are going to pay. Especially, these claims, when you get your credit card, or you apply for a financial service, they say, if you lose your job, we will pay you your salary for 6 months, or you don't have to pay on your credit card, or your credit card waived. No one expected that actually Corona will happen, and actually all these individuals, they lose their job. But some individuals, they didn't lose their job, but they are claiming we lost our job, and now they are trying to get all these facilities.
All right.
Also, the other thing, the actual organization like hospitals or medical providers or the big companies, they are going against these insurance companies. So you can imagine, you have individuals, you have companies going against insurance provider, and you have fraud happening from inside.
All right. Before I close out on the segment scope of work, I would want to know from you, for the young audience who have assembled here, who want to make a career in forensic accounting, should they be specific about choosing an industry? If they want to be in employment, not necessarily with a practicing fraud examiner, but they want to go and work in, say, insurance, in manufacturing, etc., is there a place where they must make a choice?
Of course, always try to go and select an industry first you like, and second that you have experience in. So if you work before in banking, go to the financial institutions and do investigation there. If you actually work before in operation and manufacturing, go to that industry and make sure you go to industry that you like, because the work for you that you are going to do, any individuals who's doing auditing, or they are doing investigation, or they are doing any kind of compliance issue, usually these kind of works, number one, they are very hard to be for you to do. The meaning you need to actually figure out the processes. You need sometimes to work for long hours, 12 hours a day. And number two, sometimes they can be dangerous. The meaning you discover non-compliance, or you discover fraud, or you discover an audit issue, and they are going to go after you. And in some situations, when you take the wrong move, you may be dead. There are cases like what happened with Jalal Ibrahim in Malaysia, where he was actually Jalil Ibrahim. Jalil Ibrahim was working in the banking sector. He was working as head of internal audit in Malaysia. When he went to Hong Kong to investigate the branch of the bank in Malaysia in Hong Kong, actually he got killed and he threw in banana plantation because he was going to uncover the biggest fraud, which is 1.2 billion that happened there. So always you need to understand this is a really dangerous domain. If you don't have the knowledge and experience, and if you don't have the determination and the desire for you to catch these fraudsters, much better for you to work in marketing.
I agree. In the Indian context, I don't know whether today's young audience would remember or not. Approximately, I think about 15 years ago, there was an officer called Satyendra Dubey who was working in the government, and he was killed. He was killed because he was a whistleblower. Anyhow, I think we are done with part two. That part was very insightful. I'm now going to step into the third segment of our story on forensic accounting and fraud examination. This time we are going to pick up on one of the most important things, namely the skills. What are the kind of skills, hard skills, not the soft skills, the hard skills, the subject knowledge that people should have?
So when we are speaking about the skills that in fraud examiners, they need to have, actually, we consider them 4 skills. Number one, you need to have the skills of a lawyer. You don't need to be a lawyer, but you need to have the skills of a lawyer. The meaning you need to know how you are going to handle fraud cases in the court. You need to know how you are going to present this evidence in court. You need to know the proper legal way of collecting this evidence and the proper way for you to maintain this evidence. So later you will not have any issue with them. So for example, if you are conducting an examination and you are interviewing someone and you told him something like this, you say, sir, the sooner you tell me what happened, the sooner you can leave. Now you make him your prisoner. So he can say in that case anything you want him to say. And later he can go tell the judge, well, I was saying anything because I want to go home. The fraud examiner, he's keeping me as a prisoner. This is why you need to actually understand the legal elements related to fraud. You need to know how civil cases will be handled, how criminal cases will be handled. How can we handle cases under the common law and under the civil law? So in that way, you will be able to cover all the elements when you are handling investigation. So this is number one. Number two, you need to have accounting skills. You don't need to be an accountant. We know we have some individuals, they have zero knowledge in accounting, but you need to learn the accounting skills. So in that way, you need to know exactly how can someone manipulate the financial reporting. You need to know what are the requirements related to disclosures. You need to understand what kind of internal controls we need to have over the financial reporting. And you need to know all the different kinds of financial schemes. How can someone do fraud through inventory valuation? How can someone do fraud through fictitious revenue? How can someone do fraud using billing, using expenses, using purchases, using payroll? So these are all the different financial schemes that you need to know and understand. Also, you need to know the knowledge related to criminology. You need to understand the science of crime. Why? They say individuals who are doing fraud, that actually they do it because of so many reasons. Maybe there are so much pressure on them and this is why they are doing fraud. Or maybe the internal controls are not in place, so in that way that motivated them to do fraud. Or maybe they are under so much pressure inside the organization that the organization pushed them to do fraud. This is why we need to understand the science of criminology to be able to design the proper compliance, ethics, and internal control inside the organization. So in that way, we will be able to prevent and detect fraud. Also to establish the right structure, the right processes for us to have the proper corporate governance to ensure that the organization is managed properly and having the proper risk, fraud risk management in place. Finally, you need to have the skills of an investigator. They say not everyone can be an investigator. The meaning that some individuals, they are not qualified to be an investigators because their mind is actually scattered. They have cloud thinking. They are driven by their own biases. Sometimes that these individuals, they are thinking that everyone around them is guilty and they are trying to fix the case. They are thinking in Sherlock Holmes way. Sherlock Holmes is completely wrong. What you need to do, you need to always know the proper investigation technique. Investigation is not intuition. Investigation is a technique. You need to know what is the proper way of obtaining the evidence, the proper way of documenting the evidence, the proper way of conducting a fraud investigation, fraud interview, how you will be able to handle all the evidence and finally come up with a conclusion, and how can you write the fraud examination report and then testify in court. So these are the 4 main skills that you need to have as a fraud examiner.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Yad. There was just a question from one of the attendees. I thought I'll put that in right now because it was connected with what you were telling. He wants to know whether a cost and management accountant, a CMA, can be a forensic accountant or fraud examiner.
Of course. If you are working as a cost accountant, as a CMA, and you are actually called by the court to do forensic accounting, you can, because you will go and look for the accounting and financial evidence that can actually use in the court to provide an expert opinion. So for example, they bring you in to tell you, is the cost of goods that actually the manufacturing company decided on is correct or not? And then you can show them based on your financial study and analysis that actually is not correct or correct. But for you to do fraud examination is completely a different game. Fraud examination, you need to gain different kind of skills. So accounting skills that you have is not enough. You need to know how to handle issues from the legal side. You need to know the criminology side of it, and you need to know the investigation side of it.
All right. Yad, you said that a good forensic accountant should have accounting knowledge, should have legal knowledge, should have knowledge of criminology, and should have investigative skills. Coming down to soft skills, are there any personality traits, any soft skill that a person should have in order to earmark him as a good forensic accountant and fraud examiner?
Of course, and this is why in our courses, we teach a special course related to how can you as an internal auditor or fraud examiner have the proper skills to do investigation, because investigation requires certain skills. Let me discuss what are these skills. We do an escape game. Do you know the escape game, when they lock you in a room and you need to escape within an hour? And we implement different kind of quizzes for them using the skills that they need to gain. Number 1 skill you need to gain, you need to be able to connect the dots. So you enter into this escape room and you see different photos, and you need to connect what is the relationship between these different photos for you to find your clues. And this is why for investigators, they need to be able to connect the dots. The meaning they need to see what is not in front of them, not what is in front of them. Usually management, the accountants, they see what is in front of them. Investigators, they need to see what is missing, what is not there. This is based on a very interesting book called The Law of Subtraction, that for us, we are 2 kinds of individuals. Individual will see what is in front of them, and individual will see what is hidden. You need to be able to see what is hidden. So this is very important skills. Another thing, you need to have a good memory. The meaning, you go inside the organization and you are looking at certain financial report and you see some numbers. Then you are looking at another financial report. If you have a good memory, you say, well, I remember in this report, I saw this number and it was for company X. And in the other report, I saw the same amount, but for company Y. So why in 2 different reports, they have different name? So definitely there is something going on. If you don't have the proper way of memorizing things, to be able to examine them, you are going to have difficulty, because so many things are going to slip out of your hands, out of your brain when you are doing the analysis. And number 3, you need to be able to have the ability for you to actually not be biased. The meaning for you, most of us, we are biased. We say, oh, we found some evidence, this is the person. No, you always need to go and look exactly at what the evidence are saying and follow the evidence, and don't say, I know that he did it, I believe he did it, I feel he did it. Don't follow your feeling and thinking. What you need to follow the evidence, because sometimes because of your feeling and thinking, you will try to manipulate or fix the evidence against the person, and you end up at the end with the wrong conclusion. But you are not going to back up. You don't want to appear stupid in front of board of director and audit committee. So you will say, yes, this is what happened. And you try to create sometimes fake evidence. So these are very important 3 things from the soft side you need to gain.
I think our Indian audience would understand evidence, the importance of evidence, because now we have seen a lot of movies where no, the courts rule out saying that, oh, this event might have happened, but where is the proof? Where is the evidence for that? That was good, Yad. I just wanted to ask you one question before we close out on the skills section. How long does it take for a person? How many hours of work or how many years of experience does it take for a person to become, let us say, quote unquote, an expert in fraud examination?
Okay, so let me explain to you. The process is very simple. Based on, and the research, they say you need 10,000 hours in any domain to be an expert. So for me, I gained my knowledge and my experience within 3 years. Why? Because I was actually working and studying intensively on it. So in that way, you can gain it in 3 years, you can gain it in 20 years or 25 years. The meaning, you need to spend 10,000 hours conducting investigation and studying investigation and figuring out exactly all these techniques. And after that, you will be expert in that domain. That's the whole idea. However, you need to actually do the proper investigation, because I know so many investigators that they learned the wrong techniques. They went, attended a training, and the trainer said, if the person is not answering, you can just hit him. If the person is not answering, you can take his head and put it inside the water and get it out. We call it enhanced investigation techniques. My friend, if you learn the wrong techniques and if you follow the wrong investigation methodology, you are going to end up with amazing knowledge in the wrong direction. And that way you are going to cause disaster at the end. So you need to be able to get the proper training and the proper experience from the right individuals for you to be able to carry it forward in your career.
All right, Yad, we'll now go to segment 4, which is, I think, one of the key segments. People would like to know what course, what academic qualification should they have in order to be a good forensic accountant and fraud examiner.
So here we come to something very important, that you need to have the proper education. Unfortunately, until now in our universities, we don't have a degree saying you are actually going to be graduated with a degree in fraud examination or forensic accountant. There are only few, universities all over the world. They are offering undergraduate programs and even master programs. Maybe there are 3 or 4, even for PhD. Most of the skills that we learn when we are studying business is related to auditing and accounting. Auditing and accounting, if we are working, if we are studying accounting or auditing. They don't teach us courses related to investigation, related to the laws, related to investigation, related to, fraud examination, related
but
to...
But what is the course that one should take? So would it be...
What I recommend you, the education here, if you go study in a university, you are learning the theories. You are not learning the practical application. But if you want to gain a practical knowledge that you can use tomorrow on your job, this is the global certificate that you need to have, which is called Certified Fraud Examiner. Certified Fraud Examiner is the global certificate that will help you gain the knowledge and the skills that you need to carry out an actual work. This is the professional certificate. It's not an academic certificate.
That's
so
okay.
With this certificate, we cover everything that you need to know related to fraud prevention and deterrence, related to financial transaction, related to fraud, the investigation technique, and legal elements of fraud. So the issues that usually covered in this certificate, they are massive. That we speak about how can you plan for the investigation. We speak about the interview theory and application, understanding how can you do data analysis, how can you obtain and document the evidence, how can you go and trace illicit transactions to be able to recover the money, how can you do the proper reporting, what are the computer forensic knowledge that you need to gain as a fraud examiner. Then we go to understanding the criminal behavior of fraudsters. How can you actually differentiate between white collar and blue collar crime? Figuring out the proper corporate governance, the proper fraud risk management, the proper internal controls and compliance that you need to have inside the organization. And then we go to the laws related to fraud, understanding exactly how can you handle cases under the US law, how can you handle cases under international law, understanding the legal rights of the employees, how can you testify in cases, how can you handle money laundering cases, bankruptcy, tax fraud. And finally, we speak about the financial transaction, understanding exactly what are the different financial schemes that can happen related to individuals stealing the money coming in or going out, figuring out how healthcare fraud can happen, insurance fraud, financial institution fraud, bribery and corruption, consumer fraud. It's massive
just
amount of knowledge you will gain.
Yeah, very quickly. I saw this point number 3, law relating to fraud. Somebody who studies from, let us say, the Middle East, does he read a different set of law? Somebody who studies in India, does he read a different set of law as far as the CFE exam is concerned? Or does everybody read the US law?
No, we teach in the class the US law and the international law. So in that way, we teach what we call the civil law, which is used in UAE, and we teach the common law that's used in US. So you need to, if you are in US, most likely you will study the US law. But if you are outside US, we teach both. We teach the common law and the civil law.
All right, we'll now move to our last segment. Even as Mohammed Ibrahim we'll move to the next one. This we'll take in the Q&A session. Even as Mohammed Ibrahim tries to collate the questions and sequence them, we'll go to understanding what is the way forward. Can we move it?
Yeah, this is our next one, the paycheck.
No, the next after this.
Okay, but let me speak about the paycheck because it's important, because I can see here in the question and answer, so many individuals, they are asking.
Yeah, that's why I said we will tackle that in the Q&A part. We'll now go to, in the Q&A part, you tackle that. We'll go to the way forward.
Let me address here just for a second, then we can move. So many individuals, they are going to ask, what is the potential? Why should I actually study forensic examination? Why should I actually study fraud examination? So you can see, if you are gaining a global certificate like the CFE, your salary will improve. They say individuals with CFE, they earn 34% more than non-CFEs. And you can see exactly where they have demand on these certificates. Most of our clients who are coming and studying CFE with me, for them to be certified, they are coming from the banking sector and they are coming from the government, because there is a massive amount of fraud happening there and they need individuals who are qualified. And they are actually getting much more money because they are earning the certificate. And who's actually really focusing on the certificate as well? Internal auditors. Because most of the time when you find non-compliance or you find gap in the internal controls, you discover indirectly that maybe there's a fraud case happening. So you need to have the basic skills related to how can you handle investigation. So gaining this certificate will really help you in progressing in your career and will help you in earning more in the future.
I think this is a great piece of slide, tells people with a great amount of clarity that they will pick up as much as 35% more. We'll skip the slide part. Can we remove the PPT part? We had looked at, just to summarize before we go to the road ahead, we had offered an initial introduction, rather Iyad had offered an initial introduction to forensic accounting and fraud examination. He then very briefly spoke to us about what is the scope of work. He talked about corruption, about asset mismanagement, about financial statement frauds. He also talked about the skills that are involved. He said, have the skill of a lawyer, have the skill of an accountant, have the skill of a criminologist, have the skill of an investigator. He then moved on to say that no, the Certified Fraud Examiner course is the global gold standard as far as fraud examination profession is concerned. I think he very, very pointedly told us that if you do the CFE course, you end up getting 35% more than what you would have got without a CFE course. We now go to the very last segment before we kick off the Q&A session. What, Iyad, is the road forward? Today, everybody and their uncle are talking about artificial intelligence. They are talking about automation. They are talking about machine learning. Will all this also impact the world of forensic accounting, both in terms of perpetration and in terms of cracking the crime?
So of course, we need to understand that most of the organization are automating their processes. And once these processes are automated, so many of you working in accounting, in auditing, and investigation, you are gonna actually lose your job. Because if there's a system, we don't want you actually manually to go and audit it. They say, can we eliminate fraud in our organization? The answer is yes. You say, wait here. Really, we can eliminate fraud? The answer is yes, if we eliminate a human, because humans are doing fraud. Machines will not do fraud. If you give a machine, if you use a calculator and you say 1 + 1, the calculator always will say it's 2. But when you go and ask an individual, he will manipulate. And this is where we need to understand that for us, organizations are moving forward by automating the process. We can see it in the banking, we can see it in the government, we can see everything is moving to the cloud. So what will happen? Are we gonna in that way lose our job? The answer is no. Machines can't work alone. We still have individuals operating inside our organization. And these individuals, they may overcome the control, or maybe they will do collusion, or maybe they override the control. So what we need to do, we need to always work inside the organization to provide different kind of values. So in that way, we need different kind of skill set. What is the different kind of skill set that we need? We need to be able to make the right judgment call. The meaning the software is gonna identify it's a fraud. The software is gonna highlight the issue. The software is gonna collect the evidence. The software is gonna document the evidence. At the end, are you gonna make the right judgment call? And are you going to advise the organization to help these internal controls so future will not happen in the future?
So how many jobs are going to vanish in your view?
They say it's around more than 30% in this domain. It's going to actually, but they are going to lose their job, but we are going to have different kind of skills. So you are going to have individuals who's going to now actually do forensic examination on the machine to see any hacker attack the machine and make the machine make a mistake. Because in that way, if you have a machine operating inside your organization, maybe the hacker will attack that machine, and now the machine is working for the hacker, not for you.
Thank you, Yad, for that 40-minute conversation. I think it was very instructive. I'm sure our participants, attendees would also have benefited a lot from that. I will now request Ibrahim to organize the questions. Maybe he will do a brief preliminary of whatever he has in mind. And then maybe we will take another 10, 12 minutes, during which time he will try to accommodate as many questions as is possible. The rest of the questions we will try to provide you an answer off the recording here. There are a lot of people who have wanted the PowerPoint presentation. To whatever extent it is relevant and useful, we'll definitely share with them. Yes, over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Patabi sir. I think audience are enjoying the conversation between Patabi and Iyad because they have been unraveling the mystery and secrets behind the forensics. And we have now questions pouring in from the audience. And before I move into the question segment, I just want to give a brief about the book Beyond 2020, 25 Happening Careers in Accounting and Finance. This is a work of 8 professional accountants who have come together under the lead of Patabi Ram, and they have missioned and championed the cause of this book by deep diving into identifying what are the 25 happening careers. Then they researched on these careers. They met industry professionals. They had interview with the experts, and we thank the experts who have been part of this journey. A wonderful one, I would say. So this is the work which is coming soon to you in the form of an audio podcast, an ebook format, and a print version. So stay connected to us to know more about the webinars and know more about this book. So with this, I would like to start with the question and answer segment. And as Iyad mentioned, most of the questions are in the nature of what is forensic, and do I see any professional opportunity, and will I get a job if I do this course, and what kind of courses I have to do. So, but there has been one exciting and interesting question, I would say. Do courts require an empanelment procedure for forensic auditor? So I asked this question to Iyad. Is there any procedure for empanelment of forensic auditor, and what kind of qualifications they look for forensic auditor?
All right, for forensic auditor, usually if you need to do your job, again, CFE is very relevant. Why? Because it will teach you the basic understanding of the legal elements related to fraud. It will teach you the main skills that you need to gain related to investigation. So this is the global certificate. However, there are so many master degrees available in forensic auditing and fraud examination where you can go and study and be able to know exactly what are the practices, what are the new things. But unfortunately, not all of them, they focus on practical implementation. They are more theory based.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good way of putting things for people around. The second question I would like to put it across Patabi sir. Is there any authority in India for conducting forensic audit and accounting work? And what is the scope for professionals for forensic accounting in India?
While I'll provide a very broad answer because I'm not an expert in that area, Yad would possibly help us answer much better. One of the things that is there is that the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India runs a certificate program on forensic accounting and fraud examination. For CAs, that can be a good starting point. But I think in the end, one has to necessarily do the CFE course, because that, like Yad was telling earlier, is the global standard recognized across the world. Maybe the ICAI course can be helpful in terms of initial understanding, even if it covers the entire course content of it. But ultimately, if you want to attract client who would naturally, all said and done, the CA profession is almost always connected with audit and taxation. That's where, and rightfully so, the brand has been built. So I would think that a CFE course would be the ultimate choice, and given the fact that someone has actually passed the chartered accountancy, he should have very little difficulty about passing the CFE. Would that be broadly right, Yad?
Yes, CFE is a not that difficult exam. It's much easier than any professional certificate in accounting and financial sector. For us, our delegates, they pass the exam with us within 4 days. So every day we cover one of these subjects we discussed, and they take the exam, and within 4 days, they will get a global certificate in fraud examination.
All right. Once again, yeah, that could be very misleading for many of us. Let me ask the question a little differently. Let's say I finish my chartered accountancy today. How many days or how many months time do I need to prepare to take that CFA exam?
Nothing. I will tell you, we have delegates who they are in their 4th year in university, meaning they didn't graduate yet. Once they come to our classes, we teach them all the basic skills and knowledge that they need to have for them to pass the CFE exam. Again, they are not going to become expert in 4 days, but in 4 days, they will be able to gain all the skills and knowledge that they need over 30 hours for them to be able to pass the CFE exam and know all the fundamentals that they need to have for them to do an investigation. Then they will need to go and acquire the experience by implementing these best practices on the job.
Yeah, there is a huge compliment that's come from one of the attendees here. They say your course that you do in the UAE is possibly the best training that can be offered. Looks like one of our attendees attended your session.
Thank you very much.
Ibrahim, go on.
Yeah, we will continue with the questions. Like there is a question from one of the attendees. He says this, does technology like blockchain, artificial intelligence, MI would kill the profession of forensic accounting? I address this question to you.
No, see, it's not going to kill it because we are not going to actually run away from humans doing the process. Of course, it can reduce the need for us to do all these kind of examination, because once you have blockchain, the meaning, for example, let me give you an example. In Dubai, they are implementing blockchain. So when you go and buy your real estate, it's going to be based on blockchain. The meaning, no one can go to a government record and change the ownership from you to someone else, because in that way it's listed there in the blockchain. So the concept, the same thing in the government, they are implementing that. So once you are coming to life, they give you your birth certificate, and after that, no one can change the date of your birth certificate or your name, because it's all based on blockchain. So that's going to reduce the amount of fraud. But unfortunately, every time you implement the system, someone is going to come and figure another way for them to manipulate the system. And this is why we see a big trend over the last 2,000 years, fraud is always increasing. And the number of fraud examiners that we need, they are increasing. Fraud is the only booming industry in our current recession.
That's a wonderful way to put across the message. Yeah, I mean, we all for one believe that fraudsters would find ways and mechanics in terms of perpetrating the fraud, though the technology is changing. So we move across to the next question, an interesting one for the benefit of all the attendees. In order to become a certified fraud examiner, is it necessary that one has to be a professional accountant like a chartered accountant or a certified public accountant, or anyone can become a CFE?
For the CFE, anyone can become CFE. You just need to, because we have individuals who are engineers. I ask him, why you are coming to take CFE? He say, in my engineering projects, we have issues related to the report, related to the material used, related to the performance, related to the evaluation. So fraud is everywhere. This is why fraud is different than anything else. Fraud can be everywhere. And this is why you need to look around you. You see exactly, are you actually victim to fraud? For example, you are ordering some food from the restaurant and the restaurant is actually doing fraud by giving you replacement, or they are not delivering some of the items, or the delivery person is actually taking something. Are you victim to fraud with a telecom operator? You are actually signed for a plan, but actually you are getting billed for something else. You can see fraud is happening in every transaction and interaction, and we need to be able to be aware about these red flags and know exactly how to go and investigate them.
Ibrahim, just two more questions, pick them up and then summarize and we'll close out.
Sure, definitely. Most people are interested to know where exactly they can get jobs after completing the CFP course, which industries they need to offer them jobs after CFP. Can you enlighten us a little bit on this year?
So it's interesting, when you take CIA, Certified Internal Auditor, you hardly can do anything after except doing auditing. When you go and take a CA, Chartered Accountant, you will not be able to do anything other than accounting. But with CFE, you can do compliance work, you can be internal controller, you can be doing investigation, you can be working in the fraud department. Some individuals say, wait, yes, in most of the banks, they have two different departments. They have the fraud department and they have the investigation department. And they have other departments like money laundering. They have other departments like financial crimes. So the opportunities that you will have when you are certified fraud examiners, they are massive. Even you can work in accounting, in finance, or in operation. So there are so many opportunities, but on top of all that, there are so many opportunities for you to work as a consultant with the Big Four. So because most of them, they have big team for them to do investigation in different industries.
Most of the attendees are now asking us questions about the CFP course. What is the structure of this course? How long does it take? What is the cost for doing this? How they can enroll? So I suggest they can approach the expert, subject matter expert, for this course.
Mohammed, just one thing. Iyad, if it is fine with you, you can make a 2-pager. We'll send to all of them. It'll save a lot of time and effort, although it should be available on the internet. Given the skills that you have, if you can put that out, we will mail it under your name.
Sure. We already have also video. If they go to my YouTube channel, they can watch a full video explaining what is the CFE, what's the structure, and what is the process.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I suggest that the attendees do that. If there is any difficulty in identifying, let us know. We will help you out on that. Yes, Mohammed, you can plan to close.
So I want to take the final question from one of the team members of our book. He's interested to know about the SWOT of forensic accounting, the strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat. A difficult question, I would believe, but still, if Iyad can give it a try.
Can you just repeat the question so I understand it?
Yeah, one of our attendees who happens to be a contributor to the book 25 Happening Careers, he asked a question: what are the strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat for a certified fraud examiner?
All right, so let me start with the scary one. You are gonna get so many threats. You are gonna be subject to individuals who are gonna create trap for you. So they will call you and they say, we would like to give you some bribe for you to overcome some of the issues in your report, or they are gonna try to harass you or harass your family. you are going to be actually maybe in some serious situation. I'm not saying in general, in serious situation, you are going to be in difficult positions when you are dealing with big fraud cases. So definitely, this is why we say always make sure you don't actually try to be Superman and Spider-Man. The meaning, if you are doing fraud examination and you discover any fraud, you communicate it to the audit committee and the board and move on in your life. Don't say, I want to catch this person. I'm going to stand outside his house. I'm going to follow him to see exactly what he's doing. I'm going to try to actually catch him. It's not your job to catch him. Your job to do the proper examination, collect the proper evidence, and provide it to the authority. What if the authority decided not to take action? Don't take it as a personal issue between you and him. So make sure you differentiate between your personal life and between your professional life. Now, as opportunities, you will be able to really learn the secrets. What's the meaning, the secrets? For example, my friend is working in the banking, and he told me, yeah, you can't imagine, every day I come to work, it's so exciting. I learn secrets of issues happening related to fraud, or some stories, or some schemes that never, and it will never be published publicly. It will never be written in any book. Why? Because they are unique in nature related to the operation. I know another person working in government. He said, yeah, the amount of fraud and the schemes that are happening, you can't even learn it in any book, but they are very interesting because it will make you see exactly how can someone be so clever and overcome the system. So it's going to be very exciting for you to learn the skills. But now, what is interesting, why a fraud examiner will keep doing his job with all these challenges? Because it's an amazing feeling and experience when you go and then uncover the fraud and see the person who is doing fraud behind bar, to see this person is actually getting the punishment, to make sure that actually these individuals who are victim to the fraud, they get their money back. That's really the accomplishment and the glory that you will have at the end of the day.
Thank you, yeah. I think audience today have enjoyed this wonderful conversation, and we all have been enlightened and ignited today on this discussion. And I believe now on people will think fraud. So not from a perspective of committing one, but definitely from finding one which is going on around it. So this is from our side. So for the questions we have not answered today, we would like to reply them as much as possible through offline mode. And we would like to let you know this was the first of the webinar on a career in forensic accounting and fraud examination. There are many to come, and you can watch till then. You can watch our podcast on Apple, on Spotify, and on Anchor as well on the forensic chapter. So stay tuned to us. And I thank once again our subject matter expert, E.R. Murtada, a certified fraud examiner and fraudologist, and also to our beloved Pattabi Ram, who has done a wonderful job in anchoring this event and asking the right questions to the right man. So with this, we would like to take leave from you and stay connected and stay tuned to us. Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.